we're kind of transitioning a little bit from what we've been doing the last couple months with the parenting and kind of getting maybe even a little bit more practicality with our parenting. And I'm going to draw some parallels here as well to our love and respect for our marriages. So if you remember, we didn't do that too long ago. So we'll talk about that a little bit too, and then relate that even to our parenting issues. So Titus chapter 2, we're just going to read a couple verses here, and then we'll come back to it a little bit and talk about the words that are here. But Titus chapter 2, we're just going to read verse number 4. So here, we'll start with verse number 1. Titus chapter 2, verse number 1 says, "But speak thou the things which become sound doctrine, that the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound of faith, and charity, and patience. The aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things." And this verse is where we're focusing, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. So speaking about, again, that the verse number 4 there, the teaching, and we could go through what men are supposed to be, and the aged women, the young women, all that, but we're going to focus on teaching them to love their husbands and to love their children. Looking up at that verse, both of those words, love, there are the phileo love, the friendship love, not the agape love, the deep, unconditional love that God has for us, or that God tells husbands to love their wives with that agape love. But in this verse here, specifically telling the young women to basically like their husbands, right? We talked about that before. Remember, you say, "Do you love me?" Well, of course I love you, but does she like you? Right? And then that could be a different answer on different days. And this verse is telling the women, and we'll apply this to our parenting, husband or moms and dads, but to love their husbands in a way that they like them, that they're fond of them, and then to love their children in that same way, that they're fond of them, that they like their children, that friendship love. And talking that way, because if we take the whole love and respect idea, and if you remember from the husbands and wives need love, right? Husbands need respect. That's what God has told us in his word to do for one another. In the same way, kids need love. And we all know that. And I mean, you can see kids that grow up without parents or with a bad home situation. It affects them long term, right? Not getting the love and care and the nurture that they need as they grow up. We know that kids need love, and this isn't a surprise, but I think we're going to look at it in a way that a different perspective maybe. But then also parents need respect in this relationship between the child and the parent. Parents need respect, and God tells parents to honor their father, or kids to honor their father and mother, to obey their parents. And really that word honor there has the meaning of respect and giving respect to your parents. So as a parent in that role, you want respect. And when your children disobey, or when they're just straight up disrespectful, you feel disrespected. And a lot of times that brings that frustration, that brings that what do I do, or that anger even, when you don't get the respect as a parent that you're supposed to get. And we may not, I know at least in some of my parenting, necessarily look at it that way. We could go back to when you aren't obeyed, it's annoying, it's frustrating, it messes up your day, it's something that's an inconvenience to us as parents. And we've talked about taking those moments and making them opportunities, right, to teach and to show and to love. But if we look at it and understand that as a parent, when you aren't obeyed, you aren't respected, and that'll affect your emotions, affect how you feel in that moment when you're dealing with your child. And it may cause you to act in a way that's not unloving, as if I don't love my kids anymore, but unfriendly, as in mean, angry, right? And parenting in a way that's not the way God would have us parent, but lashing out and parenting in a way that's just carnal, right? And out of our frustration and anger. And so if we treat our child in that manner where we're parenting unfriendly and unloving, and they feel unloved as a child, they can react even more unrespectful or disrespectful. So it's when we have the crazy cycle that we were on as husbands and wives, right? When you're not treated with respect, husbands, you tend to react without love. When wives aren't treated with love, they tend to react without respect, and you get that crazy cycle going, and it just spins. We can have a similar situation like that with our children, within our family, and have a family crazy cycle. Obviously, like I said, God tells children to obey and to honor. Exodus 20, honor thy father and thy mother, right? That's respect. Ephesians chapter 2, same thing, honor thy father and mother. And then here we read in Titus that the wives or the moms are supposed to love their kids, like phileo love. So it's that fond of or that like love. And there's no commandment in Scripture for parents to agape love their kids. There's no commandment for that to happen. I think part of the reason that is that that's kind of a natural thing for a parent that's in living the way they're supposed to be, that agape love comes. I mean, you come with your granddaughter and just that love is there immediately. They don't have to do anything for it. They just exist, and that deep unconditional love for our children exists. Now, as they grow older and they start to talk back and they start to make their own decisions, or they start to flail on the floor when they don't get their way, then that agape love doesn't go away, but the phileo love may waver, right? You may not be so fond of them in those moments, but that agape love doesn't go away. So we're never commanded to unconditionally love our kids. We're commanded to love everyone, to love each other, and our kids fall into that. But you feel that love again naturally. But when that frustration and anger comes out in a parent when you have to discipline, sometimes that can appear unfriendly. Right, it can appear not phileo love, and the kid may feel like, even though they're not correct, that they aren't loved, and that can cause them to act in a certain way, and so that can start that crazy cycle going. And so we talk about that love. Also in Ephesians chapter 6, it says, "And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath," right, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And that nurture is education. And we've talked about this before too. Training, care for the growth and development of your children, right? That's what that word nurture means. And it's nurture of the Lord, right? So how the Lord loves us and cares for us. And we talked about this last week too with mercy. The kind of mercy that the Lord gives us, we want to respond in kind, right? We want to give that same mercy in our life to everybody. But act like him. So to nurture our children and not provoke them to wrath, right? As fathers, we're given that commandment a few times. Again, in Colossians, fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged, right? And there's a couple stories I'll tell here in a minute, or examples of fathers not being the fathers they're supposed to be, and how that can affect children and their self-worth, right? Getting discouraged about who they are, about where their place is. And then as they grow, that can affect how they treat their spouse, how they treat other people around them. So as a parent, we're the responsible ones, right? And with a husband and wife relationship, with the love and respect, by the time we got to the end of that whole series, we hopefully got to the point where we understand. We spend most of the time saying, this is why you feel the way you do, because your husband acts this way, it makes you feel this way. Or because your wife responds this way, it makes you feel that way and react that way. And we begin to understand why we feel the way we feel, and maybe even why we react the way we react with our spouse. But by the time we get to the end of it, hopefully we come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter how your spouse treats you, it's how you treat your spouse. And so regardless if your husband is never loving to you in a way that he is supposed to be, that does not change your responsibility as the wife to be respectful in the way, regardless of how he treats you. And the same thing for the husband. If your wife never gives you the respect you deserve, or that you don't deserve, or give you the respect that God tells her to, she never treats you in that manner, that does not give us as husbands license to not be loving. Right? We are supposed to come away from that whole lesson series doing what you're supposed to do regardless of how your spouse treats you, of how your spouse reacts. So now we take that thought process as the mature parent, as parenting, it's for adults only. I mean, parenting is not for kids, right? It's just kids aren't mature enough emotionally. And I mean, we can be honest and say a lot of adults aren't mature enough emotionally. And that's part of learning, right? And understanding that about ourselves. And as you get older, you make mistakes in your past and you learn from those. And hopefully you can be better as you go forward and grow. But parenting, it's for adults, because adults are supposed to be the mature one in this relationship. Again, remember, we're ambassadors, right? They don't belong to us as children. We are to represent God to them. And so how we parent is supposed to be a representation of who he is and how he takes care of us. So when we come to that love-respect dynamic within the family, children need to feel loved. Bottom line, they need love, regardless of how or disrespectful they are, right? Because parents need to feel respect. We want that respect. God has given us even the honor of getting respect. He has told our children to respect us as parents, to obey us. And so that's a natural need that we have. But understanding children, they take time to grow and develop and understand those things. And not every time that they are misbehaving or disobeying isn't necessarily disrespectful. And so it comes to us as the parents, as the mature ones, to decipher that and understand that, and to be able to parse the disrespect from the childishness, from the foolishness, from the irresponsibleness, right? So from toddlers with tantrums, right? Just we've all seen that. Toddlers just throwing tantrums, not getting their way, to teenagers with attitudes, right? And we've all seen that too as teenagers grow and they think they know everything. There are attitudes that come with that. There are some questions as parents that we can ask ourselves when that crazy cycle begins, right? When the disrespect or the unloving, whatever that happens, when that cycle starts to spin up, there are some questions we as parents should ask ourselves preparing for that as we see it happening, which means you have to be in control of your emotions enough as a parent to not be frustrated and not lose your temper and not lash out, but be in control of your spirit and control of your temper. So some questions you ask one is my child feeling unloved? Now, this isn't about babying your kids and making sure that they never have a bad day or that nothing ever goes wrong for them or that they always get what they want and they feel loved all the time. We're not saying that at all. We'll get through this, and it may seem like discipline isn't even something we should do because they'll feel unloved if they discipline. We're not going to say that, and we'll get more into the discipline specifics later. But a question you can ask as that tension begins, and again, it can go from a toddler, and I mean, you can't allow a toddler to just throw a fit in the grocery store. You can't just be like, well, I don't want them not to feel loved, so I'm not gonna be harsh with them or pick them up or constrain them in any way. I'm just gonna let them be so they feel loved. No, you have to break that will, right? It's a battle of wills a lot of times as a toddler. You have to overcome that. And as teenagers, you can't just allow them to mouth off and do whatever they want, right? But when that crazy cycle begins, you need to ask yourself, do they feel unloved? Have I treated them in a way, or is that what's in their heart, right? And we've talked about this here leading up to this too. It's not just about their behavior, but it's about what's going inside their heart, inside their mind. What is causing the behavior, right? And as they get older, that becomes more of a question that you want to dig a little bit deeper into. So that's the first question, is my child feeling unloved? Second question is, am I feeling disrespected? Right? Be honest about it with yourself. Am I feeling disrespected? And as a parent, you may be like, well, no, I'm in control, and it's not about my emotions and my feelings. It's about they need to obey. End of story. God says, children, obey your parents. God says, honor thy father and mother. They aren't doing it. I need to handle it. Now, while that is true, be real with yourself about how you're feeling. Do you feel disrespected? Do you feel as though they are disrespecting you personally? Right? If you have to be honest with yourself. Because if we're not honest with ourselves, we can use the guise of I'm just doing what God says to do for us to meet the punishment or whatever that we feel in the moment. So we have to be honest with ourselves. Am I feeling disrespected? And then the third question is, how will I parent God's way regardless? So how will I parent, like we've been talking for these last couple months, how will I parent the way God wants me to as an ambassador, regardless if I'm feeling disrespected? Regardless of the love that they are, or the respect they're giving to me, will I still give the love and parent the way God wants me to, regardless of how I feel? And so as parents, our first reaction, again, for children that are acting less than positive is to think this child is not being respectful. They're supposed to obey their parents. I have to put a stop to this. And again, while that is true, right, that is our responsibility, but that's our usual first emotional response, and then everything else kind of goes out the window in order to stop what is happening here. With all the scriptural backup that we have, we can feel the pressure to make sure our kids are being obedient, to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do, and we can react sometimes too sternly or in frustration and anger. Right? God tells us as parents not to provoke our kids to anger, and usually if that's happening, there's probably some anger coming from the parents initially to provoke that. So we can take Scripture and what God has given us as a responsibility and use it as an excuse to parent a certain way. But if we are unwilling to be honest with ourselves, once you admit that you feel disrespected, right? It's okay to admit you feel disrespected by your kids. You're gonna feel it because kids, they sometimes they aren't even trying to be disrespectful. It's just how they come across, and we'll talk about that here too in a minute. But once you admit to yourself that you feel disrespected, and that might be the reason why some of the emotions are coming up or some of the ways you're about to handle a situation comes, ask yourself next then, should I feel disrespected? Right? If a 4-year-old is throwing a tantrum because they didn't get the toy they wanted in the grocery store, in Hy-Vee, you're ready to check out, you've got half the stuff done, the cashier's looking at you like, what's wrong with you, lady? What's wrong with your kid? And he or she is just throwing a fit. Are they being disrespectful to you intentionally? Did the 4-year-old go, Mom didn't give me this sucker, I'm about to be disrespectful, and just start to throw a fit? That's not going through their head. They aren't thinking, I'm being disrespectful, I'm going to show Mom what's for. They're just saying, I want this, you didn't give it to me. I'm so self-centered and childish that this is my reaction when I don't get what I want. So they aren't being disrespectful. They're being a child. Now that behavior needs to be handled. That doesn't mean you're like, oh, they're not actually being disrespectful. Go ahead, finish off. Or here, I'll give it to you to make you stop. That's not the answer. The answer is to handle the situation. But as a parent, you have to think and realize what's happening and not take it personally. I told them before we came in the store, there's no candy. They knew it. I said, don't ask me for candy. I will not get you candy. We're not getting candy this time. Maybe some other time, but not today. And they disrespected me by asking anyway and then throwing a fit when they got the answer they already knew the answer was. And so the frustration comes because you told them. And so the anger comes because you already told them. And then you start to parent in a way that's pulling their arm out of socket to get them off the floor, shove them into the cart, right? And just unfriendly, not kind. But you got to handle that situation now. And we've all been there and we all react that way. I don't know that would be the best way to react, right? There are ways as a parent we need to handle how we feel disrespected. Irresponsibility from a child is not the same as disrespect, right? Children are irresponsible. They make dumb choices, right? If your kid is in the house and he's throwing a baseball against some cushions because he really loves baseball, it's raining outside, but he's got to get the wiggles out, right? And so he's throwing a baseball into the couch. And you've told the kid, we don't throw balls in the house because there's a lamp there, there's a window there. You've told the kid before. But you come by again days later and he's throwing this baseball against the couch again. So as a parent, you're like, I have told you. And you say, I told you not to throw baseballs in the house. And he goes, oh, I forgot. And you go, no, you didn't, you little liar. You did not forget. How dare you lie to me now too? There's no way you could forget. I told you. I remember the situation very well. And you feel as a parent disrespected. And so now you call him a liar. Maybe you don't say you little liar quite so harshly, but maybe you do, right? But you call him a liar. You say you didn't forget. You're just disobeying. And you as a parent feel disrespected. You feel as though you've given command. It's pretty logical, right? It's not because you don't want them to have fun. It's because you want them to break something. And kids are irresponsible. So the odds are, the more baseballs he throws against the couch, the odds go higher and higher that it's going through a window or through a lamp at some point. It's just going to happen. The odds are going to work out that way. And so you, as a parent, feel like you're being disrespected with your rules that you have given him, and he's 10, 11 years old. He knows better, but he's just not. He's disregarding you. And then lying to boot to say he forgot, right? It's irresponsibility. It's not disrespectful. Most likely he didn't go, I remember Dad told me last week not to throw this baseball in the house. Doing it anyway. He most likely didn't think in that manner. He most likely was just like, I'm so bored, I'm just going to throw this ball. I like throwing this ball, I'm going to do it. And the minute you came in the room, he's like, oh, Dad told me not to do this. Right? So he may just be irresponsible. He may just be foolish, not necessarily disrespectful. So as we said before, parenting is for adults, and as the adults, our maturity and response instead of reaction is our responsibility. So it's going to require you to slow down and think through the situation, think through whatever the issue is in the moment. And then those are two examples, but get kids that are older, and now it's not throwing baseballs or throwing tantrums, it's words, right? It's what's in the heart comes out more in words than behaviors. So it's our responsibility to not react to those things, but to respond. And that responding takes thought, responding takes time and effort. And so as a parent, we never want to be jumping off, off the cuff and losing our temper. And that's what happens when we don't think through how we handle those things. And that is not giving love. You can discipline and correct in love. There is a way to do that. And that's our responsibility as parents to do that. So we want to stop that crazy cycle from going. So there's a couple things we'll talk about here today that we need to do in order to stop that from happening. The first thing is to decode, right? We talked about this with husband and wives, right? Pink and blue, right? We see things differently. We understand things differently with our children. And again, the responsibility is on us as parents. We're most likely not going to get our kids to say, okay, I need you to decode the parent's thought process and think how mom and dad would think in this situation. They're not going to be there, right? They're just not likely to get that way until they get older. And as they get older, that's another option, another way you teach them how to be parents when they become parents someday. But it's on us to decode what's going on with our kids. And that's, again, wanting to know what's in their heart. That's where all this behavior comes from. So one of the things that we can decode is their spirit, right? If they have a deflated spirit, if they have an angry spirit, what's going on? And that's just another way for what's going on in their heart. Proverbs 18:14 says, the spirit of man will sustain his infirmity, but a wounded spirit who can bear? Right? And our kids can get wounded spirits, and we can wound their spirits as parents. There's a story this author gave of his son was a coach in a little league, baseball league. And there's an 8-9-year-old kid, center field, popped a lens out of his glasses, his eyeglasses, and was looking for it in center field. His father was in the stands. His father was clearly inebriated, yelling at his kid from the stands to find his glasses, storms out onto the field. By this time, other kids are out there trying to help him. There's dumps out there, coaches are out there, and the dad is just screaming at his kid. How much it costs, you're always losing stuff. Just terrible behavior, right, for an adult. Just yelling at his kid, and then he comes to the point where he hits the kid and knocks him over and just storms off. Knocks the kid down, storms off. The kid is there just trying to hold the tears in. And the author's son went up to him, put his arm around the kid and says, look, don't worry, you didn't mean to lose the glasses. We'll find it. Don't worry, it'll be okay. And as soon as the coach put his arm around him, the kid just lost it. Tears, just bursting, right? His spirit responded to the care and the love that the coach gave him. Because clearly that's probably not how he was treated at home. If the dad was willing to do that in public, it's probably worse at home. So this kid's spirit was deflated, was wounded and hurt. And something this small can affect him. And his response was to withdraw, right? He was going to fight that crying. He wasn't going to cry in front of his friends. But the minute any amount of love was shown to him, he broke, right? And obviously that's an exaggerated story that we probably, hopefully, won't deal with our own children ever. But there are things that we as parents can do that will deflate our kids, right? And a lot of times, just like this dad here, it's done out of anger. It's done out of frustration, right? And we're likely never to react that way to our children, but we can say harsh things. Our tone can be really angry. We can use, and we talked this before, we can use threats and fear to get our kids to do what we want them to do. And because we're bigger, it works. Right? But what does that do to their spirit? What does that do to their heart? As a parent, that's our responsibility. Another thing to decode is anger. Glenn, we read this already, Colossians 3:21, fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Right? We can threaten our children with punishments, with whatever the case may be. Another story here, this author had a really bad father. It was not great to him. And there was a moment, he said he was about 15, 16 years old, and his dad had just been treating him terribly. His mom gave him the love he needed, but never got it from his dad. He said he walked through the kitchen, grabbed a knife out of the butcher's block, and says, I'm going to kill Dad. And he goes, I don't think I really was, but I was mad. He was so angry, right, that was his thought, the reaction, is I'm going to kill Dad. And his mom, he said it pushed his mom to a point of fear and of what's going to happen, and she was able to talk him down, got the knife from him, but he goes, my parents never once mentioned that situation to me, ever. We never talked about it. It was never brought up. It never came to what's going on in here. What causes that type of of response, that behavior. It's something that's in his heart, right? The anger for which the way he felt he was being treated by his dad specifically had simmered and simmered and simmered, and he pushed it down and pushed it down, and then one day, boom, right? Something happened that triggered it and exploded. And the parents aren't responsible for the sins of the child, right? If he does something, if we talk about school shootings, those kids, there's something deep down inside that's troubling them. Right, and the parents are not responsible for the acts that they do, but the reasons maybe they lead up to that point, we can help. So we can help curb those things. We can help address those things, and that's our responsibility as parents. Again, kind of another dramatic story that's not likely, hopefully, to happen. But although we're not responsible for their reactions and their sins, it does matter. How we parent does matter and can have short-term and long-term repercussions. So understanding and decoding. And it's all about really what's happening in their heart. Why are the behaviors coming out the way that they are? What's going on in their heart? What's going on in my heart? Right, as a parent, in those situations when those issues start to come and the cycle starts to spin, you have to wonder what's in their heart and discern that. But you also have to discern what's going on in your heart. Right? Are other things bothering you? Are you frustrated about other relationships or work or whatever? Is that something that should come out at your kids also? Right, we have to have the responsibility and the discernment to be able to handle our emotions in order to help guide them to where they need to be. Right, when a spirit deflates or erupts, we need to ask, is our child feeling unloved? And when your spirit deflates or erupts, am I feeling disrespected? And again, as a parent, don't be embarrassed to admit you feel disrespected. Being afraid to admit anything is wrong and that you're in control is just not true. If you're feeling disrespected, if your emotions are there, don't pretend like it's fine and just not admit it because you don't want to. Recognize that you are angry. Recognize you are frustrated, right, because of how they're behaving. If they would just behave, I would feel fine, right? Recognize that that's going on in your heart and in your mind. And then once you admit it, you should realize and responsibly understand you're on the cycle. The family crazy cycle is starting to spin, so how do I stop that? And it's going to have to start with you. Right, if our kids behave all the time, sure, I guess that would take care of it too. If they never disobeyed, if they're always respectful and the perfect kids, then we would never be on the crazy cycle probably. But they're humans, and our job is to teach them and parent them. And so it's likely your responsibility to stop the crazy cycle from happening. So if it's going to happen, how do we stop that? And it's going to start, again, with their heart, right? Is the teen being purposely disrespectful, or are they just being self-centered teenager that hasn't even considered others? That's typically the problem with teenagers, is they aren't necessarily always being disrespectful, but they're just thinking about them and them only. I mean, I've seen that in my teens and days that just nobody else is even considered outside what they're feeling and wanting in that moment. And you can maybe think back to when you were a teenager and when you had head-to-head butting with your parents. A lot of times it was because you wanted something and you weren't willing to consider other people may not feel the same way, or if you were, you didn't care, right? And that's how teenagers often can be, is very self-centered. So is that teenager being disrespectful on purpose and they need the hammer brought down, or do you need to get to the heart of it and find out they're just being self-centered and very selfish, and you might still have to bring the hammer down, but it'll be done in a different way to address the issue, not necessarily the behavior, right? Getting to their heart, discerning that. Is the younger child, being disrespectful, or is he just being irresponsible, like the kid with the baseball? Psalm 25:7 says, "Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to thy mercy, remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord." Now, we don't always want to be remembered for the sins and the bad things we did as children and as teenagers and young adults, right? We want God to forgive us and move past those things. Doesn't excuse sin, right? It doesn't mean it's okay. Doesn't mean your children can behave any way they want to and just get away with it. But understand their kids, understand their children, understand their learning, and get to the heart of why the things are happening, the heart of what the behavior is coming from. So don't disregard it's not, if they disregard your rules or your instruction, that's not okay, right? We can't allow that to happen. But we can handle it in a way that we discern between disrespect and childishness or irresponsibility or selfishness. We can respond in a way that targets the real reason, not just because we feel disrespected, but that they're irresponsible. And so we can address the irresponsibility, or we can address the childishness or the self-centeredness, whatever the case may be. Again, parenting is for adults only. We must not deprive our children of the love or the fondness or even the kindness, the niceness, because they deprive us of respect. Right? We can't do that. As parents, we have to be the mature party. And so when your kids don't give you the respect that you deserve, or that God tells them to give you, we cannot respond in a way that withholds love or kindness from them. We just can't do that. We have to give it, just like I said with the husband and wife. You have to respond the way you're supposed to, no matter what, even if they're the worst. Right? If your kid's just having the worst day and they're just being what my grandma would always call us, a little pill. I don't know why you're such a little pill. It's like, well, it seems like a big pill would be a problem, not a little one, but whatever. It's an old saying, I don't know, back in the day. But even if they're having the worst day and just treating you terribly as the kid, they're just the terrible, worst day ever, that does not give us license to treat them in the way that we feel we're being treated. We still have to be the adult. We still have to be the parent, and we should treat them in the way that God would treat us when we're being the worst ever. We're having just the most disobedient day ever. God doesn't always come down and rain fire on us all the time, right? He gives us mercy. Now there are times, and again, we'll get to discipline. Discipline has to happen. You can't allow behavior to just go unchecked. But we must give love when no respect is given. We must not be unloving or unkind to motivate respect, right? We don't want to parent that way, again, with threats or bribes or guilt. We don't want to parent that way. We must bring our maturity into the daily skirmishes in the family. You must remain calm, cool, and collected. As a parent, that's not always the easiest thing to do, but as the mature part of the relationship, you have to maintain that. And even when meting out punishment, which you will be required, and God tells you to do, to correct, even when teaching, when you're frustrated, when you're at your wit's end, when your day has been bad and then they just add on to it, that does not give us license to not behave in a way that is loving in our parenting. We have to parent in a way that we are ambassadors. Again, parent in a way that we represent the Lord to them. And so how would he respond? That is how you respond as a parent. So you cannot allow your emotions of feeling disrespected to go out and treat unlovingly. It goes back to your marriage too. It applies the same way. And I thought this was a good time to kind of just put some emphasis on that too, is that if your spouse is not treating you the way that she should or he should be, that does not give you license to just do what you want either. We learned that, and it was reinforced to me, is that you treat your spouse the way that you're supposed to treat them regardless. So you can't use you're being unloving for you to be disrespectful. You can't do that. You can't say you're being disrespectful as an excuse for being unloving. That type of relationship you're going to be on that cycle all the time if that's how it is. And it's easy to get away and just life and mundane and everything happening to get in that mode. And we don't want to do that. And then when it comes to our children, we have to behave that same way. And you got to expect not to be given the respect that God tells them to give you. That's the way it's going to be. And it's our job to get to the heart of what the problem is and address it. So decoding, and then next week we'll talk about diffusing and how to. So once you figure out what it is, how do we fix it? How do we diffuse it? How do we stop that cycle from going and diffuse the situation? So